Okay, is everybody back on to our class? Everybody ready to start?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Danny. Everybody can just give me a thumbs up so I know you're on. All right. Okay, so in the classroom, we have the very dedicated to fighting traffic and all the rest of the insane business that's going on around the school, Mr. Johnny Lee. So thank you, Johnny. All right, so today what we're going to do is review your creative assignment on the ratios, and then get into looking at a couple of people that are the old masters of environmental portraiture. And that's sort of the topic of the day, is environmental portraiture, which can be very challenging and at the same time very creative and interesting. So we're going to look at two of the masters, and then we'll take a break, and then Johnny and I will do a demo, and we'll see how that goes. The idea was that we would have all of you here, and we'd break up into teams, and you know, each team would do an environmental portrait, but totally understand trying to stay away from the insanity of Hollywood today. But you all missed a good time trying to zigzag around the streets. Okay, so let's do this. I'm going to have you share the screen and show your creative solution for ratios. So I'd like to start actually with Martin, if you can take over the screen and show us your solution to the ratios. Creatives, the creative side of the ratios.
Give me a second. I need to get the image.
Ah, that would help. Johnny, you got the link for Zoom? Because I'll have you do yours next. Or Martin, do you want me to just jump to Johnny's while you find your image, or are you ready? I think he's got it. Are you good, Martin? Okay. So go ahead and share the screen.
Share screen.
Down at the bottom of the bar, the navigation bar, where it says should at the very bottom where all the little icons are.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, reverb.
Can you guys see my screen now? I have a new computer and I had to work with the sharing settings and preferences.
No, not yet. So it's on the Zoom navigation bar down at the bottom. Let me come back to you, because we're getting like a reverb also on your sound. So okay, so let's go to Johnny. All right.
Yes, this was my cat.
Let's see. Let's get everybody muted except for Johnny. Is your mic on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's because of
So we'll just have to see if anybody can hear you. Oh, yeah, come on up here.
Yeah, so I just had one key light, the ProPhoto U1 light with the small softbox.
Uh-huh.
And then I just kind of lit it from about a 45 degrees angle, about 5 feet height. Put it down my cat on the counter. Oh, we just lost video.
So I'm sorry, did you say you had like, is that with the softbox?
Yeah,
Okay, so which, or was it the Octi?
it wasn't the small one. It was like a 2x4
Oh,
or
okay,
a rectangular one.
okay, so smaller,
Yeah.
the smaller box, softbox. And so what ratio then were you shooting for with this?
I was going for like a 12:1, 8:1-ish. Going for like something dramatic
Mhm.
lighting.
Okay,
It was during daylight, so I had to shoot it at like f20 to get like the ambient lights filtered out. Yeah, I think it was like f20 shot at like 150 shutter.
okay. So a couple things that, just from the technical side, when we're shooting with flash, the f-stop is going to control the exposure on the subject. And the shutter speed that you're shooting at will control your ambient. So to control the ambient that was around, because you mentioned you stopped down to f20.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't necessarily have to stop to f20 to control the ambient. So that would be controlled by your shutter speed. What was the shutter speed that you were at?
It was like 150.
Okay, so let's just say that you started with correct exposure at f11, or that's the f-stop that you wanted to use was f11 with your flash. So the exposure on your cat, what's your cat's name?
Mink.
Mink?
Yeah. Mink.
Okay. So let's just say the correct exposure on your cat would be f11, but the ambient light that's in the room was giving you too much detail of the surrounding area. If you just start to go down on the shutter speed, well, down, actually, it's up, getting a faster shutter speed, that will dim the ambient.
Yeah.
And that's actually something that we're going to do today in our demo. But so you don't have to necessarily control the ambient with f-stop when you're shooting flash. And that's sort of the advantage of flash in a daylight situation where you're lighting the subject with your flash and you want to be at a certain f-stop. And when we use that feature called high-speed sync, which ProPhoto has developed and other manufacturers, where you're able to shoot at a shutter speed higher than 1/200th or 1/250th, you can actually shoot at high-speed sync at 1/8000th of a second.
Oh, wow.
So what that does is gives you the ability to either lighten or darken your ambient light source and maintain, say, like if you wanted to shoot this at f2.8, you could shoot that at like an 8,000th of a second at high-speed sync. So that's one of the advantages of using electronic flash. Okay, so what ratio do you believe that you're at with this rendition?
I think it's like around 112, 12:1.
So 1 to 12?
Yeah.
Okay, so we were talking earlier before we went online about some semantics that sometimes you will read ratios that are written 1 to 2, 1 to 4, 1 to 8, 1 to 12. And then you'll turn the page or you'll go to another website and you'll see somebody else talking about ratios where the numbers are reversed, 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 12 to 1. So it's really the same thing. It's the difference between the key and the amount of light on the shadows. So just remembering that 1 to 1 is the equal key and fill. 1 to 2 would be a one-stop difference between the key and the fill. 1 to 4 would be a two-stop difference. And that means that the shadow side is going darker, so the power is less on the fill than it is on the key. And so by the time you get to 1 to 12, you're gonna have very little detail on the shadow side. So that's sort of where you're at with this. I would probably say this is more like a 1 to 8, because we can still see detail, back in here. There's not much, but there is some detail in there. And then we're getting a little bit of lack of separation, between where your cat's body is and then the background. So what was the background?
It's like our kitchen counter.
Oh, a kitchen counter. Okay. So it might have been where and this is maybe something you could try again if you wanted to, where you're using the shutter speed to control more of this detail back here, the ambient. And if you just slow the shutter speed down a little bit more, you'll wind up with more detail back here. If your cat is far enough away from the background. So that's the other thing that we have to consider when you're doing something like this, is how far was your cat from the actual background, this wall back here?
Maybe like 6 feet.
6 feet? Okay. So that's appropriate. Where we start to have a problem with the flash influencing the background is based on two things: how close the flash is to the subject, and then how close the background is to the subject. So the further the background is away from the subject, obviously the light's going to fall off, and not from the electronic flash, the light's going to fall off and not affect the background.
Right.
So that's the other thing that we sort of want to be aware of, is the distance of the subject to the background, or, if it's an outside light source, and then the distance from the light to the subject. So how far would you say the light was away from your cat?
Maybe about 4 feet.
About 4 feet? Okay, so if you brought the light in, say, to 2 feet, the light from the flash would fall off very rapidly in exposure towards the background. So it would give you that opportunity then to either light the background separately with another light, or to slow the shutter speed down and get a little bit more of the ambient source. Now, what happens, of course, when you slow the shutter speed down to get more ambient on the background, you're going to wind up with getting ambient also on the shadow side, because that's also going to affect it. So those are some things that I would want you to think about. As far as the aesthetics of the photograph, I think it's really conveying, the personality of your cat, which is very cool. You got them to look right into the camera, which is great. The only thing that I would suggest is that if you have like a very small, either mirror or a silver card, to get a little bit of a specular highlight in the eye, or both eyes, you would see it. That little specular highlight in the eye gives a lot of life to it. Because you see that when you look at a portrait of a person, and you can see the reflection of the light, which is the specular highlight in the eyeball. That's part of what gives a little bit more life to the photograph. So those would be some things I would want you to think about with this. All right. Cool. Thank you. Okay, Martin, how did it go? Did you get that lined up, or do you want to give it a try?
Let me give it a try and see if it'll
Oh,
work for me.
I think you might be muted, or we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Say something again.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay,
I can hear you on Johnny's
really?
computer.
Oh, wow.
Strange.
Well, let me see if this will work. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Oh, I see what happened. We lost. Hang on a second. We lost
think-
our.
I
we
think
lost
you
our
were getting
monitor here
feedback
where our
with-
sound was coming from.
I think that's one of the reasons why you might have been getting feedback on me. I don't know. And I've got a new computer, so I'm still trying to mess with the settings as well.
Having a bit of a problem here. Hold on.
Not a problem.
Okay, let's try it again.
Can you hear me now? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So this is my creative image. It's a family friend with her guitar. And I missed all of Johnny's initial presentation because I had to restart Zoom and I left and came back.
Okay. Okay. Well, I've got this on record, so I'll post the recording so you can hear what we had to say about his image.
Okay.
All right. So take us through your
My image.
your setup.
Okay, so I placed an OCF grid. It was a 35-degree grid, literally 90 degrees to my subject. So the face is being lit from that angle, and I have a 2 by 3 feet OCF softbox to the right of my camera. And I was trying to get the reflection to kind of like fill in the other half of the face, if you may. So this is the image that I came up with.
So the reflection on the side of the guitar
Correct.
is so the effect that you were looking for was that would mirror the woman's face.
Yes.
And give us that. Okay. So that's a great concept. I love what you were going after. So you said that your main light source was what was your main light source on the left-hand side?
A grid. It was a B10 with a grid on it.
Okay. And what we're seeing reflected then on the face of the guitar, facing towards the camera, is what's the reflection that we're seeing?
Since she's facing us, it's her right side of the face. That's what's
Yeah,
being
no,
reflected.
I mean on the surface of the guitar.
Oh, on the surface of the guitar, what's being reflected is the softbox.
Okay. So when I look at this image, I think two things. First, that the reflection of the softbox on the guitar, on the front of the guitar, gets a little distracting.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think, is this, well, I don't know, you can't see my cursor, can you?
No, I can't.
So on the reflection that's on the top of the guitar facing towards the camera, there towards the middle bottom, it looks like it might be, just guessing, maybe a reflection of you, because it looks like it looks like there's hairs coming off of somebody's head. that are in shadow, and then we go to the highlight of the reflection. So I'm not sure what that is.
I think that
Either way,
I think that might be a dirty guitar with
oh,
scratches.
oh, okay, all right. Either way, I think your image would be improved if that highlight wasn't so dominant.
Okay.
So do you see that, like the shape of the highlight, and then also the value of it? So by the value of it, I mean it's a lighter value, right? Because it's a reflection of the light. So it's actually a lighter tonality than her face. So when we look at this, what's the subject matter? The subject matter, I would think, is her, and then the reflection of her face on the side of the guitar. So you might want to play with cropping this, where you crop into like a third or even more of a third on the right-hand side of the image. So you're actually going to be cropping out a lot of the detail of the guitar, but you would leave in the shape, sort of that S curve, of the guitar, and we'd be able to see the reflection of her face in the side of the guitar, but without so much seeing the reflection that's hitting the top of the guitar. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does.
Okay, because I think what you'll see with that is we'll get right to her without being distracted by that reflection.
Okay.
So I think you're really going in the right direction to make a unique photograph. I like your idea of the reflection of the side of her face on the side of the guitar, and mirroring, the side of her face that's lit. That's, I like the way you're thinking about that. Ideally, we would have a little bit more separation between the top of her head and the background. You see how that, at least what I'm looking at, there's not really any separation from her hair, her dark hair, to the background. Maybe on the original there might be, but that's also something that we could work on in post-production to pull that off. So what I can do is because you uploaded the image into the portal, but you uploaded I think you uploaded like a raw file from do you shoot with a Canon?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I think what I would ask you to do is upload like just a high-res JPEG.
Okay.
Because what I'll do is I'll take and put it into my Lightroom and just crop it for you. And I can just sort of show you, maybe it might be a little bit easier if I just show you what I was talking about. Now, the other thing that when you're shooting something like this is I want you to be aware, of your light source reflecting into, like, in this case, the guitar, the face of the guitar, not her face, but the light source reflecting. And you might have to either use like a flag to flag that light source off of the guitar, or just turning the guitar slightly might correct what we call the incident angle, how the guitar is reflecting that light. So that's something that you could also be thinking about. But mainly, I think you're headed in the right direction with your concept. I think it's a unique way of looking at taking somebody's portrait and saying something about them personally. Now, what do you believe your light ratio is going from the highlight side of her face to the shadow side? Because we can see a little bit of that shadow side on her forehead.
I'm new to ratios, but I'm thinking it's 1:4, 1:8.
Yeah, I would probably say it's going more towards the 1 to 8. Because it's, there's detail there, but not a lot, and it's dropping off pretty rapidly.
Right.
How did you go about measuring the ratio when you were shooting?
I was doing, well, I took a couple of shots, but it was, my camera settings were at f11. My key light was also at f11, and I believe my fill light was either, I want to say f8 or 5.6.
Okay, and you're using Profoto? Were you using the? I'm sorry, you must have been using the Air remote, right?
Yes, I was
And were you using it on TTL or manual?
on manual.
Okay, all right. So today what we're going to do is actually cover the TTL part of using that, which is a great feature.
Okay.
And you can sort of, gain a little bit more knowledge about how to use that.
Okay.
Okay, so good image, and definitely on the way to being even more unique. I think if we crop this, it'll help it.
Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, all right, thank you. Curtis, welcome. How was the hike in?
Interesting. Yeah. Luckily, I made like a last second decision to parking structure down because they're tunneling everything, I think, with the light.
Right.
So very wide vicinity of the.
Yeah, it's one of those days. So did you bring, because we're looking at work, did you bring your computer or something to go on Zoom?
Not to go on Zoom, no. And as we were talking about before, I tried to shoot my home and I wasn't able to.
Oh,
So we'll try and do it here likely.
okay,
Get it
Okay.
correct.
okay. Okay, so let's see. Danny, do you want to give us a view of your solution?
Okay, all right. Let me share my screen. I did multiple images. I wasn't sure if I was executing it properly, but
That's good. Multiple images is good.
yeah. So I'm still getting used to shooting portraits. So we've been playing around with light sources. Where's that? Does anybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So so this is the first one. Basically, I asked my daughter to step outside for a little bit and help me out with my assignment. So basically, I was just trying to use the natural light to create some
Okay.
lighting patterns.
So why don't you go through each image so we can see them first, and then we'll go back and review.
Got it.
I just sort of want to see everything that you posted.
All right. So this is the first one. Then this is the second one. Trying to create a Rembrandt on her face, and then this another using the like kind of split lighting pattern. And then this one here when I was trying to figure out my lighting situation.
Okay.
So I was playing around with different diffusers. I think this was using a like a warmer orange type diffuser. And this one with a flash and a diffuse, or I think a reflector on this one.
Okay.
And then
Nice.
same thing with this one. And this one here, I tried using like a cooler, like a bluish fill light on the background. So
Very nice. Okay. Okay, let's go back to the first group. Okay. So lighting wise, give us a little bit of overview what you did for lighting.
So this one here, it was around like early afternoon. So the sunlight is like all the way up, and basically I'm just trying to find an angle where I can use the natural light
Mhm.
to. I guess I was trying to achieve like paramount lighting on this one, but I wasn't able to achieve that. So, but I like the where she's positioned by the spring flowers in there. So I took the shot and see see what comes out of it. So
Okay. So were you using any kind of reflection on her face to bounce back into her face? Any kind of reflector at all? Or is that just all
on this
natural?
one, it was all natural.
Okay. Right.
I was
And
thinking
what would,
about my other plan was like I was gonna use like another set of continuous light, like maybe like an LED flashlight, and then again say going through cooler or warmer diffuser, but um we ended up not using it because we didn't know, or I cannot find a way how to position it, so I just stick with the natural light.
okay. Okay. So I think, this it has a really nice quality to it. It's a little bit hot on her forehead,
Yeah.
right by the hairline. So
Mhm.
it looks on my screen like we're losing maybe a little bit of the detail in the white where the highlight would be.
Mhm.
But it's very close. And it looks like, some of the flower petals that are catching, the full sun are losing a little bit of their detail.
Yeah.
Losing detail in white isn't always like a no-no.
Mhm.
So, as far as not having detail in the whites, like on the petals of the flowers, to me, that's not, really a big deal. Uh, but I do think, and you could manipulate this a little bit in post-production. I think you
Mhm.
could bring back a little bit more detail in the whites and in the skin tones, especially, by her forehead, and on her the bridge of her nose.
Yeah.
Because that does get a little bit distracting, where especially on the bridge of her nose, where you see the
Mhm.
highlight go, that edge transfer that we're always talking about.
Yeah.
It's very defined. It's like almost like a hard line.
Mhm.
And, that sort of is counter to, I think, the softness of what I see in her.
Mhm.
So that would be something I believe you could probably bring that back a little bit more, in post-production.
Okay.
Um, Now, the thing that we could also do in shooting this,
Mhm.
would be using some type of silk
Uh,
to put over off-camera left. So the
yeah.
the sunlight is being modified and being spread out rather than having it, direct sun. And
Okay.
then when you do that, then you're going to wind up being able to see detail in the skin much more. And that edge transfer will be much softer because with a silk, it's going to diffuse the light. So
Yeah.
that transfer edge is going to be a lot softer.
Okay.
What I like what you did is I like your composition with this, and I like the fact that you put the background um, with depth of field out.
Mhm.
So, we're not being distracted by, even though the background is busy,
Mm.
because it's out of focus, it's not becoming too dominant. And even in the lower right-hand side where, you have like a lot of white, I'm assuming that's maybe grass or something that's getting direct sunlight on it.
Yeah.
So it's all white without detail. But in this case, that doesn't, that's not really taking away from her.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that's due to your framing, where you've used sort of the 1/3 composition,
Yeah.
and where her head is a great spot in relationship to, the whole frame. And so I like the way you framed that. They're really nice.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay. So, that's a really good use of the Rembrandt, the triangle. So you found that.
Yeah.
One thing I would point out though, is if you look like in the, on her camera left eye, that's like in the eye socket itself,
Yeah.
we can see how dark that's going.
Yeah.
And you can sort of see what happens with, the light coming from the right-hand side, and then you're getting some kind of fill from something on the left-hand side. Maybe it's the actual white petals of the bush, of
Could
the
be.
flowers, that's bouncing back in on her face. So on the very left-hand side of her face, on her cheek, you can see how nice that works.
Mhm.
And then we go over to like where the shadow of the bridge of the nose creates the triangle.
Yeah.
And you can see how hard that line is. And
Yeah.
then as we go up into her eye, it gets sort of blocked up in there with the shadow. So this again would be a case where if you were using a silk on the right-hand side for the sun,
Yeah.
it would really soften that up.
Yeah.
But it's it's again, a nice portrait. And I think that you could do a little post-production in that shadow in the corner closest to her bridge of her nose in the eye,
Yeah.
to just sort of even that out
Okay.
and make it a little bit softer. So, in Lightroom, you can use, you could either use clarity, the
Mhm.
clarity slider, or the
Yeah.
dehaze, and haze it just slightly. So
Oh, okay.
it's also, because we haven't talked about this, but it's also over the lens, you could use a what's called a black pearl mist filter.
Uh,
I think some of you may be familiar with that. It's used quite a bit in cinematography. And what that does is it comes in different degrees.
yeah.
And so if you'd used like a number 1 black pearl mist, what that does is it reduces the contrast because it's like putting a slight diffusion over the lens.
Oh,
And
okay.
it in a situation like this, it would bring that contrast between the inside of her eye and where the highlight is. It would sort of reduce that a little bit. It would give an overall little softer look
Yeah.
to her face. So the black pearl mist, I think it comes in like a scale of 1 to 4, 4 really noticeable, and that's something I'll bring up and show some examples of. I think, and I'll write a note that next class meeting I'll put that up so you can see what
Mhm.
that black pearl mist filter does.
That'll be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's go to your next one.
And then this one here is more of a split lighting pattern. And then I used for post-production, I used the sepia black and
Uh-huh.
white
Okay.
filter.
All right, does anybody have any comments on this? I'll turn it over to some of you. Let's see if anybody has a comment. Do you like it? Think it's working? Any improvement, suggestions?
Don't be shy.
All right, well, it's not a true split because, obviously we're getting, shadow coming on the right-hand side,
Mhm.
coming across the eye. So, a true split would be where, where one side of the face is completely in highlight, and then the other side, where it's fairly dramatic,
Yeah.
just sort of splitting right down the center of the forehead down to the chin.
Correct.
So we could say it's a modified split. You know, maybe it started off to be a split. So we could say it's sort of a modified split. So a lot of the things that I talked about previously, I would sort of apply to this also.
Yeah.
Okay, so I like how you're composing this. I think it's a good use of the space. And again, you know, good choice for aperture, keeping the background out of focus and focusing us on her. And again, I just point out, you have a lot of really busy stuff going on, like with her blouse that she's wearing with a pattern on it, and then of
Yeah.
course the background. But that actually helps set her face away from everything. So in this case, all the busyness works for you. And the fact that you shot at an aperture where the depth of field is fairly shallow really helps. Okay, so let's go on to your next group.
So the next one. I used a single portable LED light, and I was still trying to figure out like, because I didn't have I cannot get the light meter to work properly that day, so I was just going by visual.
Okay.
So.
All right. So what do you think the ratio is on this?
This one will be like between 1:4 and about 1:8.
Okay. Anybody have an opinion of what the light ratio is visually? Let's see.
I'm thinking it's more like 1:16, 1:32.
Oh yeah, because like there's like minimal detail on the background or the shadow side.
Let's see. Who said like 1 to 8 or 1 to?
I did.
Oh, that was you, Danny?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody disagree with that?
I said that, I don't know if you can hear me, but I was thinking it's more 1:16 or 1:32.
Okay, so 1 to 16 would be almost no detail at all on the shadow side. And 1 to 32 would be completely no detail. It would basically be black without detail.
Definitely
So
wrong.
yeah, so I think Danny's assessment, because you were saying what 1 to 12, 1 to 8?
1 to 8.
1 to 8.
Yeah.
So I would go with 1 to 8, you know, which is, I think, appropriate for what you were doing with this. It has a nice feel for the light.
Mhm.
And what were you using for your light source?
For the light source, for the key light, I had like a portable LED light, like a tabletop.
Okay.
So it wasn't it is continuous, but it wasn't powerful. So I
Okay.
had to put it
So
very close.
it's not a studio light.
No.
Okay. So what you're doing is showing that you can use a 99-cent light bulb
Exactly.
and create actually a really good photograph.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we don't always need the $2,000 light to make a really good photo. All right, let's go on to, and you say you manipulated this with warming on the light, or is it just because it's you said it was a LED?
It's a LED, but I placed a like an orange
Okay.
filter on.
Like a CTO.
Mhm.
So did you put that over the lens or over the light?
It was over the light.
Okay, so over the light is a gel.
Yeah.
Over the camera is a filter.
Oh, okay.
So it could be the same thing.
Mhm.
Well, it's not actually the same thing. So when we warm a light up, we're using CTO gels, which warm things up. When we
Mhm.
put filters over the lenses, we're using probably an 81 series, which is a warming filter over the lens.
Oh, okay. Yeah, um this was all placed in front of the light.
Okay, all right, great. All right, let's go to the next.
So the next one, this one, because I was using a adjustable electronic flash, so I think I had this one pretty up high, but it came out to like about 1:4 ratio.
Okay, I would probably say in this case, you're more going towards 1 to 5.
Mm,
So the difference between 1 to 4 and 1 to 5 is not a full stop. So a full
Mhm.
stop would go from 1 to 4 to 1 to 8. So
Oh,
1 to 4 to 1 to 5 is like a third of a stop difference.
yeah.
So it's not like a giant leap that would be between 1 to 4 and 1 to 8.
Okay.
So, and you can see like with your, what's your doggie's name?
Pomchi.
We have to make a list up of all of your animals in this whole class, what their names are. It's pretty good list. So we can see that specular highlight, in the eye,
Yeah.
both in your model and in your pup. How that sort of adds a little bit of spark of life to the
Mhm.
photo. So that's
Yeah.
a good thing. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so what were you doing differently with this? Lighting wise, anything?
This one here, I added like a fill light on the background,
Mhm.
and with using a warm or like an orange uh, on in front of it, and then electronic flash to as a fill light on the front.
Okay, and what aperture were you shooting at?
On this one, let me see. I think I was trying to shoot f11 as a,
Okay.
yeah, I think it's an f11.
Okay, and how far away from the background are you?
She was like a foot and a half. She's pretty
Okay.
close. We have a small house.
Yeah. Okay, well, so now in this case, I think I asked you in our technical assignment to shoot at f11.
Yeah.
In our creative assignment, it was wide open. So what I would point out is the background, because you're very close to it, we start to see detail in the background, like on the right-hand side, you can see sort of a line coming
Yeah,
down.
the corner. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were shooting at f4,
Mhm.
even 5.6, but I would probably go like f4, that would probably disappear,
Yeah.
because of the depth of field. So that's how you can use your aperture in a situation like this. The environment, you have no choice, and of course you could go in, and I know you know how to do this, is to clone
Mhm.
that out.
Yeah.
But that just means you have to take time to do that. And when you're shooting, if you're paying attention to detail, you'll see that, and you'll go, okay, I think I'm going to open up my aperture so that I have a shallower depth of field, and the background is going to become less in focus. And what also will happen is, see the difference between the background on the left-hand side versus the right-hand
Mhm.
side. There'll be more of a gradation to that.
Yeah.
And it won't have anything to do with your lighting. It'll be because of the background being put more out of focus because of the depth of field choice.
Yeah.
So a couple of things, that's really working in your favor. I really like how you posed her. It's a very contemplative pose, and your direction as far as see how her nose is being separated from her cheek.
Yeah.
that's great, because if you would have had her turn just even slightly more to the right, where the tip of her nose touches the outline of her cheek,
Yeah.
then that becomes um, uh, a little bit more of a problem.
Mhm.
Or, then where her nose breaks the line of her cheek, where you're going to more profile, that would be another option. But where you're at with how you have her posed is really very nice. Really, really a nice job.
Thank you.
And also with this is your color palette, what wardrobe she's wearing.
Mhm.
And we're getting a little bit of highlight, on her earring. So reflection, and then also reflection on the jewelry on her chest. All of that's really done very nicely. So you're, you're really close. And I would just say, think about the things that we've talked about as far as depth
Yeah.
of field, and that would certainly make a difference. You could try this in post-production using, masking off, and I know you know how to do that.
Yeah.
Masking her off from the background, and then bringing the background with the clarity or dehaze
Oh, okay.
to just bring it more visually out of focus.
Okay.
And that, those little tweaks will bump this up quite a bit.
All
Okay,
right.
let's go to your last one.
Okay, so this one here is similar to the last one, but
Yeah.
I used a cooler, uh, I guess, gel in front of the light, just to
Yes.
change the contrast between what she's wearing and
Yeah.
the background.
Yeah, very nice. So same thing with obviously the background, but I like your color sensibility as far as how you're working with your color palette, where we're getting it's not obviously it's not true skin tone color,
Yeah.
but it has a really nice feel to it.
Mm.
So, if you were doing this for, let's say, a real client, they
Mhm.
may not like what you did with this, because
Yeah.
it's not true skin tone.
Yeah.
But from an aesthetic point and a creative point, it's got a really nice quality to it. And this would be like one of those cases where, you're working with a client and you shoot it so that your client's going to be happy.
Mhm.
And then you do something like this that is more gratifying to you, as
Yeah.
the creator. And that's something that we always have to keep in mind if you're being, if you have a client. You always want to make the client happy. But at the same time, you want to do something for yourself.
Mhm.
And I always try and make time for myself when I'm shooting for a client if I have a different, vision than they do. So anyway, I think you did a really nice job on all of these. Everything that you showed, I think you did a really good job with.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm glad you guys like it.
I
Right.
have a question.
Yes.
Since you're mentioning true skin tones, how would he achieve that? Would that be with a color checker, with white balance? How? Because aesthetically, it's a very pleasing image. And I'm taking all of your feedback, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, so if I'm going to be thinking of true skin tones, how do I achieve that in, let's say, for example, this picture?
Yes. So to achieve true skin tone, you would use a color checker. And so you'd shoot like your first frame with a color checker. And then when you go into post-production, like in Lightroom or Photoshop or any other actual photo app that is post-production, you just use the eyedropper with your application to go to either the white with detail, and so like in this case, we would put the eyedropper on the bridge of her nose where that highlight is, the brightest part of the highlight, and we would click on that, and then that would bring that highlight to a pure white. with detail. So pure white with detail with Photoshop would put it at 250 would be the number. Photoshop deals with numbers 0 to 256. 0 meaning black with no detail, 256 meaning white with no detail. And it will automatically, when you use the eyedropper with white selected, it will change the whole image to make that white with detail be white with detail according to Photoshop. Lightroom works differently, where it works on a percentage of 0%, meaning black without detail, and 100%, meaning white without detail. So in Lightroom, we would say we'd want that to be at about 94%. And we can do that also with middle gray. So in this case, like we would find a middle gray in this photo. And Martin, let me just ask you, where do you think middle gray would be in this photo? So in your mind's eye, convert the photo to black and white.
Okay.
And where do you see middle gray?
I'm thinking either within the space of the necklace, or within the space of I want to say on the nose below the shadow.
Okay, so the space below in the shadow of her nose is going to be darker than middle gray, but look at the background. So the background,
Okay.
you have tonality in black and white on the background. On the left-hand side is going on the furthest left-hand side margin is going to be middle gray plus, as we would call it. So it's not light gray, it's middle gray plus. On the right-hand side, we have probably middle gray minus. So middle gray would be, if we look at the top left-hand side, where there's sort of a gradation between where it goes from like a light gray to a darker gray. Right in that gradation, there's a middle gray. If we look at what she's wearing, which has, you know, this purplish tint to it, we can find middle gray on her left shoulder, the camera left shoulder. And so we could click on that with our eyedropper, and that would convert everything to be color adjusted to middle gray, which would also correct it. We can do the same thing with the black eyedropper. And so black, we would go into that shadow that's under her nose. And if we clicked it there, then it would correct based on that. So there's 3 different ways that we can do that. Now that doesn't necessarily dial in the skin tone. That sort of is an overall correction. So a skin tone actually takes a little bit more adjusting to our eye, and also by the numbers. And I don't have it right in front of me, but there's a chart that can give you a really close level to match, depending upon, you know, white skin, darker skin, brown skin. It's a chart that says, here's the numbers to adjust to overall for skin tone. And the way we do that is we take a section of the skin that's in the highlight, like on her cheek, and we create a little rectangle, and we then go in to that rectangle and we analyze it either in Lightroom or Photoshop. And then we can correct it going by the numbers and visually at the same time. And then we can apply that to just the skin tone by masking in the image. So it gets a little bit more involved than necessarily just putting a color checker in. A color checker is going to just give you an overall neutral. So that's sort of the big picture. We can get a little bit more involved in that as we go through our class. I'll bring that in the next time we meet so that you can all sort of get an idea of that. We've gone over that for some of you, and you might remember in our Lightroom class or our Photoshop class, we did that spot masking where we had to correct skin tone.
Mhm.
So does that help, Martin?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the explanation.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for the feedback,
right.
Professor. I'm gonna stop
Okay.
sharing.
All right. Thanks, Danny. Okay. So who do we have? Emily?
I don't have mine right now.
Okay. Let's see. Well, let me ask, who do we have that's got something to show? Or did we already get everybody? Okay, so it sounds like we got everybody. All right. Hang on one second while I turn the light on in here. Okay, so does anybody have any questions on anything that we talked about just on our critique? Any questions? Okay, well, thank you. Yes.
I'm sorry, I do have questions.
Yeah, sure.
I was under the impression that the pictures that we were taking were to be how can I say this? That they were not to be manipulated as to capture the pictures in, I guess, the rawest form. So I wasn't thinking about using Photoshop or Lightroom or anything like that. But I've been hearing you mentioning that you could have done this, you could have done that. And
Mhm.
moving forward, can I use software to adjust pictures? Or-
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
That's all
Yeah,
I
so
needed to know.
always on the creative parts of the assignment. And sorry if I didn't make this clear to begin with. On the creative side of assignments, you can do anything you want. That's part
Okay.
of the creative part of it. So like what we looked at with, like with Danny's as an example, what I'm looking at is, do I have a feeling he understood what he was doing with lighting? You know, as far as creating a creative solution using lighting ratios. And the answer is yes, there's the understanding of, you know, the light relationship between highlight and shadow, which is ratios. And then beyond that, it's wide open, you know, as far as whatever lens he's using, depth of field, shutter speed, tonality, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you.
Yes, so sorry I didn't make that clear, but the creative part of the assignment is wide open. It's taking the concept of, in this case, like ratios, and then applying it in a creative way. Okay. All right, so if no further questions on that, we'll go on to our next section for today, which gets into what we're going to be sort of looking at in our demo part, is environmental portraiture. And what I want to do is bring in a couple of very well-known names for you to share with you. And again, these are two gentlemen that in the history of photography are extremely well known for their environmental portraits. So, you know, let's define what an environmental portrait is. So as you look at your screen of me, you can see the background and it sort of gives you an idea of an environment. And although lighting is not too great, you could see that if somebody took that photo, you could sort of connect the background to some particular environment along with me. So that's sort of the basics of it. So it's taking a photograph of a person that is connected to an environment as opposed to doing it in the studio with a seamless or even on location with, let's just say, a seamless that we take out on location or a backdrop of some type, and we're creating a stylized look. So stylized means that we've removed sort of the environment, and the environment has no influence on the portrait of the person. So the environmental portrait is sort of the opposite of that. The environment provides information about the person whose portrait we're doing. So an example of that would be you're hired to shoot a portrait of a musician or an artist, and we want to know something about what that person does. And so we go to their studio and we include bits and pieces of their studio, and we try and do that in a creative way. So that's sort of the big picture of environmental portrait. So the people that I'm going to show you, are two, as I mentioned, two people that in the history of photography are really recognized for their work in that. And what they have done has been passed on to generations past them. So I would be in the generation, like 2 generations past them. You'd be in the like 4 generations past them, and apply some of the knowledge that they, were sort of the forerunners of in how they approached different lighting situations, direction of people, putting clues into the photograph as to who that person was. So a lot of times especially with the people we're going to look at, the people that they photographed were really well known. And but you can apply the principles of what we're going to look at to somebody that's not really well known. So let's just say your friend who has their own company or an up and going garage band has asked you to do a photograph of them. How can you make that photograph unique and meaningful? So that's the idea of the environmental portrait. Okay, so let me get our first person up here, who happens to be Joseph Karsh. So get this up. Okay, so have any of you heard of Karsh? All right, well, good. This will be part of your education. Can you all hear that very well?
Barely hear it.
Barely hear it?
Yeah. It's cutting out a lot.
Good or bad?
They were born in Armenia
Good.
and had to leave Armenia because of the
Very
genocide.
quiet.
In the beginning,
Not hearing it?
No.
it wasn't really for money, didn't have money.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me see if I can get this. We'll try this one. All right, let's try this.
Given to him, everything he had, he worked for.
Is that better?
He was really good at seeing how what he did today would work for him in the future. He's very much a planner. He made plans. He would wait until he could get that certain person to sit for his camera. And then he made books which would always take him to the next level. There is no pyramid that's built this way. All pyramids look this way. So this is the thing, you need the base. So Karsh did the base for many, many years, probably 10 or 20 years before he had the own base. I mean, you come back to this is what you do early in your career if you're a portrait photographer, you photograph babies and weddings. And then Karsh did some work in the theater. He, for many, many years, he photographed all the stage plays at Honolulu Theater.
When I was studying photography in Honolulu about 10 years ago, one of the photographers that I kept coming back to over and over again was Yusuf Karsh. Karsh had a way in photography of showing you more than just what the person looked like. There was something in his pictures that made you feel like you knew the person you were looking at. And that was remarkable because that was the case in every single picture he took. Whether it was a picture of Winston Churchill that everybody knows, or pictures of actors who were famous at the time that aren't necessarily famous anymore, you always got to know a little bit more about the person. There was some magical element of storytelling present in every one of his. And that was something that really grabbed me as a young photographer, and something I've been wanting to do ever since I first picked up the camera. I do that through film, through stories now, but Karsh could do that in a single film, which is amazing.
The first time that I met him, I was on my way into the Chateau Laurier, where his studio was. And that day I was commissioned to photograph a wedding. So I was struggling with all the equipment that I had to carry and trying to open the door. And Mr. Karsh came up behind me, I didn't see him at first. He didn't do it. And when I realized who it was, I said, "Oh, you're Mr. Karsh." Yes, I am. And he gave me encouraging words about the work that I was doing. So, oh, it's such a beautiful day for the work. And, he had, I guess, been out for a walk. He had picked some wildflowers. Good conversation, which I remember to this day very vividly because it was such a unique experience. The man who we all assumed was the best photographer that we could talk to, and he came up to me. He was extremely famous. Yeah, I was only maybe 22 or 23 at the time. Such a remarkable thing when you meet somebody who's achieved so much that you hope to do at the beginning of your career. It always made me wonder where I would end up. So, and he was, I don't know, maybe my age now when I was that age, or maybe a bit older, I don't know. He seemed very open. But he was very encouraging. But it all started with his most famous picture, which at the time, this was on so many magazine covers. It's really huge. Now, if somebody made a photograph and was published that much, we would say it's gone viral. At that time, of course, there was no social media, no internet. We had magazines, and every magazine in Canada, the US, they all published this picture of Churchill. And this is the one that made Karsh famous. It took him up to the next level and allowed him to do this section, which is called the Famous 500. And Karsh photographed so many famous people that everybody knew who he was. And, when he asked someone to sit for their portrait, he would normally sit next.
Karsh also wasn't afraid to change what a portrait was. There was this idea in portraiture from paintings, where a portrait is a person well lit, you see their face, they're looking at the painter or at the camera. But Karsh would turn that around. Karsh is remarkable ability to show you the person. One of the biggest ones that really stands out is the picture of Albert Einstein. There's a famous picture of Einstein that went around on posters in every classroom in the 90s, where he's got his tongue out looking at this crazy madman. Karsh's portrait is very composed. Einstein is sitting there with his hands in front of him as if he was thinking. And there's something going on in his mind. You can tell he's thinking, there's math, there's some physics equation happening in there. In that one picture, that just happens to be Albert Einstein. And that one pose with hands clasped in front of him is something he used over and over again. You see that again in his picture of Kennedy. It's in the picture of Humphrey Bogart, he's holding a cigarette, he's got his hands in front of him as if he's thinking, which shows you more than just having the person's face in the picture. He's got a very famous picture of Pablo Casals, the cellist, who is sitting in an attic somewhere in a study playing the cello, and you don't even see his face, it's from the back. He's lit with a light coming in, and it's an amazing view that you, as an audience member, seeing him play never would have. You would be in the seat looking at the orchestra. You'd never be looking at it from the back. But that portrait really shows a lot of who the player is, who the cellist is, from an angle that you couldn't be shown. And this idea of not showing everything really made, for me, a lot of what made Karsh such a great photographer.
We just lost our connection. So we just lost our connection here. Hang on. Let me go back here and see. Johnny, are you connected to our Zoom?
Yeah.
Are you seeing the,
I see Salvador Dali.
video?
Yeah.
Okay, because we lost it on the big monitor. So if I put this back on,
It's playing.
you're not getting any sound though, right?
No, no sound.
Stupid. Okay, we're having a technical difficulty here. Let's see if I can figure out what happened. All right, we've got a little technical problem here, so let's take a 5-minute break and then come back on. So you can just all mute out while I try and figure out what happened.
Will do.
But his definition of what portraiture is very rigid and unyielding.
to learn about?
So is everybody back on? They can hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, we'll put this back on and see if we can keep it going.
Pablo Picasso.
Every,
where he's
can you hear
standing
this
next to a vase
okay?
With a woman on it. Or we've
Yes.
got a picture with Andy Warhol, where Warhol is looking at the camera, holding a brush to his head, almost in a way that you would hold a gun to your head. Warhol was known for being volatile, for being a person who would fly off the handle at all times. And to turn this idea of the brush to the temple as a gun to the temple really shows who Andy Warhol was. We knew Warhol through his paintings. Some people knew him through his crazy temper and the parties he would throw. And Karsh's portrait really shows that in a very visual, in some cases, very visceral way.
Encouraging in that his story was remarkable in that he came from having nothing to being one of the most accomplished portrait photographers in the world. And that's a huge inspiration. If he can do that, then any one of us can. So when I'm making portraits myself or when I'm teaching my photography students, I'm thinking about this kind of thing, like how inspiring somebody's story is. And a lot of what we do is trying to find a common story that we can share, whether it's for making a portrait, trying to connect with that person, even just for a brief moment, or when I'm talking to a younger photographer or a student, to say maybe you want to look at the work of this person because I see some of that in your work. So I think we all find our influences through the work. You do the work, and then when you're looking at your work, you see how it fits into the wider world of history of your work. Context.
Okay, so I want to go back and just take a look at one of two of his more famous images and give a little backstory to this particular image, which is of Winston Churchill. So this is one of his most famous images. And as the story goes, Winston Churchill smoked cigars, and Karsh didn't want him smoking a cigar for his portrait. And Churchill came in, and as usual with people of this caliber, you may have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, who knows? But you're usually warned ahead of time, you know, you're going to get 5 minutes with so-and-so. And so Karsh had everything set up. So he had, you know, his assistant stand in or sit in this case for Churchill, got all the lighting set, and Churchill comes in smoking a cigar. And Karsh asked him, you know, listen, can we do the portrait without the cigar? And Churchill said, absolutely not. And Karsh said, okay, can you go over and sit down in the spot and let me take a test image? And from what you've seen, you saw that Karsh worked with a large format camera. So he was either shooting on 4x5 or even 8x10 negative film. And as Karsh sat down, as Churchill sat down, Karsh began to shoot some frames or sheets of film. And finally, at one point, because he couldn't stand it anymore, he went over to Churchill and literally snatched the cigar out of his hands. And that's when this photograph was taken. So he got the look that he was after, because Churchill had just been, you know, through World War II, the leader of England, you know, with, it's very similar to what we're seeing happening in Ukraine with Zelensky being the leader. Very forceful leader. People idolized him because of his wartime leadership. And that's what he captured in this portrait of Churchill. Churchill did not like the fact that he snatched the cigar out of his hand, but Karsh got the photograph. So that's sort of a lesson to all of us that, you know, once in a while you have to take a chance on what it is you really want to do, even though the subject may not be in agreement. And and I'm sure Karsh felt at the time, possibly because I've been in the same situation. Well, that's the last job you're going to do, because you just disrespected somebody of a very powerful manner. But this image became so well known. It was on the cover of Life magazine and has been used over and over since it was made. So that's one image that he did that was incredible. This image of Ernest Hemingway brings up a technique that Karsh used quite a bit. So now this is obviously all in the days of analog, and he would shoot on, like I said, 4x5 or 8x10, which means that you could take this image and you could blow it up to, you know, billboard size, and you could see detail. So it would be like in today's world having a 500 megabit file. So the detail is phenomenal on an 8x10 negative. The highlights that you see where we're almost seeing white without detail in here, and where the highlights are, and even over where he's got some kind of hair light happening. That's not what the original prints look like coming out of the darkroom. So Karsh was known to use bleach in his final prints, where he would have his darkroom assistant come in with a diluted solution of bleach and bleach out the highlights until you would just start to get this white without detail. So we see that a lot in his work of portraits. We can see it in, here's another one. So you can see that he's gone in here with like a cotton swab with diluted bleach on a wet print that's just right out of the wash, and bleaching out these highlights. So those were a couple of things that he was extremely well known for in the photography world, was taking chances with his subject matter, having them do things maybe that they didn't want to do, and then also manipulating the print to get the look and feel of what he wanted. So obviously, you know, what we see in Karsh's work is very traditional in as far as lighting. You know, it's very old school. And, but at the time, you know, he was, let's say, cutting edge because of a couple of the techniques that he used. So that's one thing I really wanted to sort of point out to you all with Joseph Karsh. Okay, any questions on Karsh? Okay, so the next person that we're going to look at, our last person of the day, let me pull it up here. Hang on one sec. Okay, so this is the work of Arnold Newman. And let me just see again if any of you have are aware of Arnold Newman. Are any of you familiar with Arnold Newman's work? Okay. So Arnold Newman is a little bit more contemporary than Joseph Karsh. And we'll see a little bit of, well, quite a bit of difference in his style compared to Karsh. So he would be like the generation past Karsh, like the first generation of photographers that were, very well recognized after Karsh. And this is one of his images of, again, well-known people. But what I would point out to you is that he worked both in natural light without any supplemental lighting, and he also worked with lots of continuous light, artificial light, and also with flash. So when we look at Arnold Newman's work, we're looking at composition, we're looking at how he frames his subject matter, how he uses props, and how he uses cropping. How he uses the tonal range, because he did quite a bit of work in black and white, and how he would associate the person who he was photographing with various props in the photograph. So as we go through these, you'll see here's Mondrian, and if you're an art history person, Mondrian's paintings were very cubical in the sense, or not cubical, but they were very spatially regimented. And what he's done with this portrait is, he's created these different square factors with the easel and different canvases that represented the style of painting that Mondrian was famous for. And again, you can see this is probably all with natural light, like a large window. And you all know that he's very close to that window because of the size of the highlight. So we can see how he cropped this image because this was shot like in a 4:5 aspect ratio, a 3:4 aspect ratio. And you can see that he took a lot of liberty in the way that he cropped. So Arnold Newman was a photographer that went against the grain of a lot of photographers, including probably myself, where we want to crop in the frame as we shoot. And Arnold Newman was not like that. He would shoot a little bit wider and then come into the final and crop to whatever he felt was going to be the best execution of it. So there's not necessarily one way or the other that becomes the right way or the wrong way. And here's Marc Chagall, again, very well-known artist in history. And you can see, he creates a very dramatic light. So the shadow side of his face going fairly dark, but in the background, he has, one of Chagall's paintings. And then he has him in a different kind of pose that we probably wouldn't have seen in Karsh's work. So much more interpretive than Karsh's work. Karsh is very traditional as far as that goes. And Max Ernst, who's a famous sculptor, and you can see hardly any light on his face. So the light's coming over his camera right shoulder, and his face drops into shadow except for a little bit of light on his nose, but he gets the edge light, on the piece of sculpture behind him, and then also the work that's on the walls, and bounces a little light back in to reveal Ernst's face. And again, we can see the cropping is really very untraditional at that time. So not following sort of the format guides of what format he was shooting on. He would shoot a lot on 4:5, but he also used 2 1/4, 6:7, and 35 millimeter. So he was quite proficient technically in all aspects of the different types of camera formats. And Stiglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe. And again, you can sort of see how he used composition and negative space, lots of negative space in his work that he would either fill in or he would leave blank like this. And he also was very aware, you know, of wardrobe, so that whatever props that he did use would always somewhat stand out. And then in this photograph, again, you can see not very much light on the camera side of the face, or the face side that's towards the camera, or almost a silhouette, but enough fill, just a slight amount of fill, that you got the rendition of the front of the face. But again, looking at the negative space, how he used that. So just keenly aware of design in the way that he put images together. A little bit of a softer kind of look with light. So this is probably using in natural light or his rendition of light. Arnold Newman was one of the first people to actually use fluorescent lighting. So he created a light box that was of what we would look at like with the Kino light of today. He created out of common fluorescent lights at that time. So, which worked fine in black and white. He didn't shoot much color with it because of the color shift. But that he developed a light that really sort of replicated window light with fluorescent lighting in a light box. Man Ray, who's a photographer, an artist, and you can see again, you know, his composition really leaning towards this division of space that takes the viewer on an incredible trip, but gets the viewer right to the subject matter right away. And, you know, just very masterful at the way that he leads us around in his images. Grandma Moses. So he was the master of sort of hiding the face and not revealing all the details. Jackson Pollock, who was the famous action painter of throwing paint at canvas. One of the few color images that I think we see of Arnold Newman's. Salvador Dali. So following up on one of the things that was talked about with Karsh was the use of hands and how he controlled visually where people's hands were and used that as far as a tool to composition and saying something about the person. You can see that that carried over with Arnold Newman. And again, looking at the negative space and how he used that canvas, the photographic canvas, to, in this case, if we took Salvador Dali himself, you know, what percentage of the canvas does Salvador Dali represent? You know, it's like 10% of the whole total space, but that 10% becomes the most important because of the way he's composed it. So Arnold Newman seemed to use a lot of depth of field in his photographs, as opposed to, you know, many other photographers later on who used a very shallow depth of field. And again, sort of going back to that, hiding the person's face in shadow and then filling it with some kind of reflector. But you can see the top back reflection of the light, like on his shoulders, and then on the background with all the bottle caps or the tops of the bottles reflecting the light, which is top backlight, and then bouncing some type of fill into the face. And then Picasso, this is a photograph that's a really great example of how he would shoot wide and crop. This image represents about a quarter of the negative. So he cropped very tightly on a shot that had probably 75% more space around it than what we're seeing. And this, image is very well known of Picasso. So again, you can see how he incorporates cropping and background and other elements into his message about whoever it is he's shooting. Part of the reason that many of these photographs are so successful is because of the person that he's photographing. So photographing musicians, artists, writers, film directors, creative people as a whole tend to be great subjects because they're very more independent in the way that they appear. So it's not necessarily like shooting a CEO of a corporation, which has sort of that CEO look, which I've had to photograph many. There's always a certain look to a CEO that has that corporate feel to it, where artists have much more of an independent look to them and become great photo subjects. Oops, leave that up here. Again, Frank Stella, who's known for pop art, and so color would really be a tool to use with him as far as conveying a message. Klaus Oldenburg. Georgia O'Keeffe again. That's a great image. One of his most famous images is of Igor Stravinsky, a famous music composer. And, this is like textbook composition on the rule of thirds, composition wise. And also as far as the use of negative space, and again, sort of going back to where the subject matter, the actual subject matter is very small in the relative overall space, of the image. Just looking for one particular image. Okay, this last image is of Alfred Krupp. I don't know if any of you know who Alfred Krupp was, but he was an industrialist, a Dutch industrialist, but he was also a Nazi in World War II. And Arnold Newman, who's Jewish, was asked to photograph him, and this is after the war, 1963, after World War II. Arnold Newman was asked to photograph him by Life magazine because he was one of the best photographers of that period of time for capturing environmental portraits. And Arnold Newman refused to go and photograph him because he was a former Nazi. He had served time in prison for his war crimes, and then after that became this industrialist. And finally, the editors of Life magazine were able to convince Newman that this would be a great opportunity for him to make a statement about Krupp in his own way. So he agreed to go photograph him. And you can see that he had his lighting set up. There's a light here and there's a light here, which is giving this somewhat what we call clamshell kind of light. So highlight, and then shadow down the middle. And he was actually further back where the light wasn't quite so sinister. And Arnold Newman asked him to lean forward and put his hands under his chin. And when he did that, this was the result, which again, this was one of the more famous photographs that he did. Not necessarily because it's Alfred Krupp, well, the industrialist, but because it's Alfred Krupp, the Nazi. And Newman put him in a position where he looks pretty evil. And also in the background, very, well, I won't say subtle because it's not too subtle, is the transportation, buses and trains, which of course is how all the Holocaust victims were transported to the camps. And that was the business that Alfred Krupp was in. So in this one photograph, he sort of got his own shot in on Krupp as to who he really was, and made a statement about, a very personal statement about him. And this photograph was used by Life magazine. So it was a personal endeavor by Arnold Newman to interpret this person in a way that he felt he wanted the world to see him. And Arnold Newman was, just an incredible photographer at being able to do these environmental portraits that had a message about whoever it was he was photographing. Okay, so what would be just some observations that you have on what we just looked at between both Karsh and Arnold Newman? And I'm phrasing that because we'll just phrase it as, if you were asked to go out and do an environmental portrait of an artist or even a CEO, what would be some of the things that you would be looking to not just go in and have somebody stand there and do a picture?
Try to provide context, as I did professional space.
Okay, right. That's good.
Couldn't hear what was being said.
I'll just sort of paraphrase. Johnny said that he would try to incorporate the environment and tell a story about the person that they were photographing, that he was photographing.
Yeah. Along the same lines with just like aspects of the subject personality or core attributes, finding ways to, obviously the same as John said, tell a story.
Okay, so was everybody able to hear Curtis? Mainly what he was saying was to tell a story about the person. So any of you on Zoom that have any observations?
From what I saw, I would try to incorporate aspects of this person's, I guess, personality, their job, what they do into that portrait, into that story. Obviously, like Newman, incorporating the artist with their own work in the background, that was really interesting.
Mhm.
And the use of the negative space and
Right.
composition, that's something that I was really noticing and enjoying.
Right. Yeah, good. Anybody else? Okay, so what I would say, in addition to what's already been said, a few of the takeaways are um, looking at the environment in a different way. So in a unique way. So he would sometimes use the actual setting as he found it, say with natural light, or he would light the person in a way that was more mysterious by not having so much light on the person's face and then bouncing light back into the person's face subtly. So a lot of those things we would see like a lighting ratio of the background being of a higher key than the person's face. So on some of those situations where the environment would be almost like the key light, and then the person's face would be 2 stops under that particular environment with a little bit of fill in it. So it wasn't always about, with Arnold Newman, being objective. He was being more subjective, where Karsh was being more objective. He was putting light on, for the most part, I think all of the examples that we saw had very well lit people. And then he would somewhat manipulate in post, as the prints came out of the wash, with some of his own manipulation. So there's a big difference between the two in the way that they approach their subject matter, between being more objective, which was Karsh, and being more subjective, which was Arnold Newman. Both of them masterful photographers and masters of their technique. But I would say what Arnold Newman did was take what Karsh started and bring it forward to a more contemporary point of view at that particular time. So we're talking about the mainly the 50s and the 60s, as opposed to Karsh, who was probably the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Arnold Newman, went on to be in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s as a well-recognized photographer shooting very well-known people. So both are really influencers on what we do today. And that's why we sort of want to know who they are and what their work looked like. All right, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a break for about an hour while we sort of reset here at the studio to get ready for our little demo. And what we're going to demonstrate is a environmental portrait. And we're going to try and alter what the scene looks like a little bit, what the reality of the scene looks like, to interpret it into a little bit more of a creative look. What I plan on doing with the demo is using our Pro Photos with TTL, so that you would have a knowledge of how to use TTL with the Pro Photos and the advantages of that. And then also we'll then have our people that are in class, Curtis and Johnny, do an in-class assignment. So why don't we have you all come back at 12:15 and we'll proceed from there. So go ahead, you can just go ahead and sign off and then join back on with that same link.
Got it.
Okay. All right, so we've got one person back. Martin's back here. We just need to get a few more people back. Martin, you can see and hear good? Yeah.
Yes, sir, I can. Can you guys hear me though? I can see and hear really good.
Okay, good. Just waiting for some other people to come back. Oh, there we go. There's Emily. All right, we'll give it two more minutes and then we'll start. Can you see the little box that I'm in that gives the whole scene? Do you see that, or just the only thing, or do you just see only Lightroom?
I see the hallway. I see you
Okay.
standing in front of like a setup.
So you can
And,
see,
Yes, sir.
and then you also see like the Lightroom application.
Well, let me change the
Yes.
settings here. Yes.
Yeah, you should see, you can see it, right, Emily?
Yeah.
Okay, right, good. And you see this, like the little box?
Correct.
Okay. Maybe it'll work. All right, one more minute, and then we'll start. Okay, we're gonna give it one more minute to see if anybody else shows up, and then we'll start.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, that looks upside down. That looks right, that's right side up.
Remind me about that if I do it upside down while we're doing this.
No problem.
Okay, I think we're gonna start. You guys. So Curtis, Johnny, why don't you go and get in your spot? And Curtis, you wanna come in, you can stand in here and hand me stuff. Okay, all right, okay, so let's begin. And so the first thing you're looking at on the screen is on the Lightroom tethered import of our executive, Johnny. And it's a hallway that you're all familiar with. So this is all natural light. And I'm shooting at a white balance. Let me just check. Where I have the white balance set on daylight. And these lights that are in here are somewhat corrected for daylight. So that's all natural. There's no supplemental light other than what's actually here in that hallway, which you're all familiar with. So the light actually on him is sort of nice. It gives an overall nice feeling. So currently my ISO is set at 125 because I want to use a lower ISO to maintain some good quality. But what that does is it forces me to a shutter speed because I want to use a wider aperture to throw that background out of focus. So I'm shooting at 3.5, and my shutter speed to get that correct exposure on his face is at a 15th of a second. So this is handheld, and we'll just magnify this so that you can see one of the problems of hand holding at a 15th of a second. So you can see that's camera shake. Now, believe it or not, I used to actually be able to get that sharp, but not today. So let me do one more frame. And we've got everything all set and move in here. And the idea is that we have an executive that we're at their offices, and I want to do something that's a little bit different than what's been done before or previously. So in shooting this, I have it on the autofocus with one center rectangle on my Nikon. And so I'm pre-focusing by pressing the button, shutter button halfway down on his eye, because I'm shooting at 3.5, like I mentioned. So I want that to be like the sharpest point, and then everything else fall off. But I also want to frame it. Well, that's a little bit better. I wanted to frame it sort of like our friend Arnold Newman, where he's not in the center of the frame. The framing gets a little bit more interesting with him off to the side, with more of the negative space and then everything going out of focus in the background. So compositionally, I'm pretty happy with that. And I could just bump the ISO up to 1,000, which then would give me a shutter speed of 3 stops faster. So I'd probably be at like a 1/25th of a second. And even at 1/25th of a second with this particular lens on it, because it's fairly heavy, the 2470, I would probably have to use it on continuous bursts to get 1 frame out of 5, probably sharp. So more than that, I want to control what happens with the lighting on him to the lighting in the background. So right now, everything is being lit with what I'll call our ambient light source, which is the LEDs in the wall. And we're going to go first to see what different white balance settings do to this particular setting that we're photographing when I switch the white balance. So let me change the white balance to, from daylight, we'll go to tungsten and see how that looks, just as a test. So I'm pre-focusing on his eye, and I'm moving the camera over. And now you can see with tungsten, it starts to give me that bluish look, which is also pretty nice. And now we'll switch to a different white balance in the camera. And we'll go to auto, and we'll see what that does. We'll pre-focus on him, move the camera over. And that's sort of, again, acceptable. And now we'll go to another white balance setting, which would be, we'll try the shade, the shade setting. So pre-focus. And with the shade, you can see it starts to get warmer. So sort of a orangish look to it. But either way, it's not really what I have in my head, the way that I want this to look. So I want to shoot with my aperture wide like it is, but I want to create a unique look to our setting. And that's where now the electronic flash comes in. And you might be able to see in the little box that I have one light set up, one of the ProPhoto heads set up right to camera left. Curtis, you want to just point it out? All right, so that's one head right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that light on. So what is that? Oh, I got to do it here. So I'm using the Air remote. And let me see if I get this the right way. So Air remote, and you can see it's got the A-B blanked out, which means I've got two heads. You can see there's actually one head in the background that's sitting on a sandbag, which I'm going to cover up in a minute with him, so you won't see it in the photo. But I'm just going to start with our first key light, which is, I'll turn it on from here. And I think that's 1B. So, I guess turn it on, just push the button. No, the white button. Now you got to hold the button down. Okay, let it go. There we go. Okay, there's the test. Oh, were you looking at it? Sorry. Does that say 1A or B?
This is B1.
B1?
Yeah, 1B on the same.
Okay. So is the modeling light going on and off, John?
Yeah.
It is?
It's currently off.
Currently off?
Yeah.
Okay. So now it's on?
It's on, yeah.
Okay. So with the ProPhotos, this is the battery pack one. It's actually better if you have the modeling light off. It preserves the battery power. So I've got it off currently, but most of the time we want to have it on for positioning. And what I want to do is position this head where the light is just capturing his head and let everything else for the light fall off on his body. And I'm doing that with the 7-inch reflector pulled out all the way to the very end of the light head. You remember I was showing you that you can pull that in and out, the light reflector. So this is extended all the way out. And then on top of that is a grid spot, or for you filmmakers, the honeycomb, so that the light is being controlled so it'll just hit him. Now, the next thing is, so I just have that light ready to go, and we'll test fire it again. So you always want to tell your talent that you're test firing so that they're not staring into the light like I did to him before until we're ready to shoot. So the setting on the Air remote that I'm using is, you can see, I've got this the right side up. Can you see that? So it's TTL setting, the very top right. And TTL means that the Air remote connected to this camera will give me the correct exposure automatically. I just set the aperture that I want on the camera, and then the head will adjust the power to that. And I have it at a sync speed currently at a 15th of a second. So I'm going to shoot a test with the shutter speed at a 15th of a second. The flash is going to go off, and that's going to be remember we were talking about the peak of the flash. The flash is going to be at this power that it's currently at, will be at approximately 1/2000th of a second. So even though my shutter speed's at a 15th of a second, that's going to give me the ambient exposure. So the background is going to be somewhat the same density. And we'll see what happens with the TTL if it gives us the correct exposure on his head, on his face. So let's come in here, pre-focus. Oops. Oh, I was moving the camera when I did that. Nice. Try that again. Okay, so you can see, let's look in here. So you can still see there's some slight camera movement, at a 15th of a second. And there is, you can see the difference in what happens with the color in the background. So I'm going to bump the shutter speed up so that I'm not shaking the camera. So I'm going to go up to an 80th of a second at 3.5 aperture. I'm still set at TTL for the mode on every mode, and the sync is reading currently, it says first, which means that's the front shutter. And because I'm below a 2/50th of a second, so it should sync correctly and give us the correct exposure. So that looks like the light is not actually hitting him correctly. So let me adjust that. So bring your head right here, and then your eyes are looking back to the camera. Okay, so that's TTL, and you can see it gives me the absolutely correct exposure right off the bat on his face. And we can come in here, you can see big difference between me hand holding at a 15th of a second and now shooting at an 80th of a second with the flash. So we have a very sharp image. It's also, giving me, so the background is, the exposure for the background is going a little bit darker compared to where it was, but that's okay. It's sort of the same intensity as the light that's on its face. So that, and we're at a white balance of, let me check again. We're on our, white balance is on our shade setting. So I'm going to change the white balance to go with our strobe, our flash, and see what that looks like. So I'm setting the camera white balance to flash, and we'll see how accurate that is. So once again, we'll come down here. All right, let's see what happens with the color. You can see a slight change in the color, more neutral here when I set the white balance to flash. Not quite as warm on that setting. So it is correcting, white balance is coming into what the flash color temperature would be. So now this rendition is pretty straightforward. And again, we're trying to sort of go, how can we make this image a little bit more unique? So I'm going to switch over the white balance to tungsten. So let me do that. And let's see what that looks like. So tungsten setting. And we'll come in and focus. So that's our tungsten setting. Oh wait, oops, maybe if we check that. Sorry, got the wrong one. Shouldn't look like that. Okay, so let's try that again. I mean, you should all know what this is going to look like. That's what it's going to look like, right? Because we're shooting with somewhat corrected daylight 5200 lighting, and we're setting at tungsten 3200, which forces it to the cool side. So that's, an effect that might be interesting to work with. But I want to correct his skin tone as much as I can, or warm it up so that we get more of that contrast between his presence and now alter the situation with the room, the hallway, to make it look different than what it actually looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gel my primary light, my key light, by using You can see I'm using, these are CTO gels that are going to go over the lamp head. So I'm just going to take this and put it on. And one thing I want to sort of mention to you is I'm using some gaffer's tape to hold those two gels together. Each one is a half CTO. So I've got a full CTO, which is going to make our key light warm up to counter the blue cast to his face. In using gaffer's tape on the reflector head, I have to be careful that the gaffer's tape doesn't stick to the paint on the reflector and pull the paint off. So that's why we use the clothespins or the C47s as much as possible. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Now, by putting the gels on there, that's going to change the intensity of the light. So that's probably a stop of light, possibly, that I've reduced out of that head. So we're still going to keep it on TTL and see if the TTL can calculate that correctly. So then, and there we go. So actually perfect exposure. So I didn't touch the camera as far as exposure, aperture, or shutter speed. That's all done through TTL. Now, on my Air remote, again, I'll put this up here. You can see that there is, let's see if I get this in here right. Oops, let's get it to the camera. That I can go plus or minus on my power to the head that's giving me my key light. So I can control that all from the camera. I can turn the modeling light off, which I'm going to do right now. So that won't affect any exposure. Let's just sort of see if the modeling light had any effect at all on the density. So it shouldn't, because we were on TTL, but let's just sort of see. So pretty much exactly the same. Slightly about maybe an eighth of a stop difference, because we look at the highlights, you can see a little bit of density change, but perfectly acceptable. So TTL is incredible how that can help you working with the situation that we're currently doing. Okay, so now I'm going to go from a white balance of tungsten, where the camera sets the tungsten, and I'm going to change it to where I can dial in the Kelvin temperature that I want. And I'm going to exaggerate the difference, because currently with the setting I have on white balance, it's at 3200. So I'm going to drop it down manually to 2500. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, so you can see a change, a pretty significant change in that blue tone. So by manually changing it to the lowest Kelvin, the 2500 that I can manually, I actually get a better blue, which is what I'm after. I'm trying to get a more cool versus warm tone between what the light is on him and what's going on in the hallway. All right, so to exaggerate that more, in other words, the hallway getting darker, but him staying exposed like he is, I'm going to change the shutter speed. So I'm at an 80th of a second, and I'm going to change the shutter speed to 1/60th. So one full stop, and that's going to cause the background, the continuous light source, to go darker, because I'm reducing that by one full stop. Again, the TTL is going to give me the correct exposure, which shouldn't change because that's the aperture. I haven't changed the aperture, 3.5. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so significant change. That's one stop difference in shutter speed. And I got Johnny right at the right time for his eye close-up. Okay, so let's go one stop difference from that. Now, this is currently at 160, and I'm still on what's called first sync on the air remote. So I'm going to go to 250. I'm going to go to 400. So now I'm going a stop and a half up, and the air remote senses that I'm over my normal shutter speed sync of 250. So it's automatically switched the air remote to the high speed sync, which gives us still the strobe getting its peak firing in synchronization with your shutter speed. So what happens when you go to high speed sync is that there's a series of flashes that are hard to detect by your eye because the power of the strobe head itself goes off in a series, in a very short series. So it's not one flash, it's actually a multiple of flashes, but we're not able to see that by the eye.
Just which button is to change that the sync, high speed sync.
Oh, okay, so see that, where it says like this. Okay. So on your Canon, it has a third button right there, and you push that button. It should do it automatically depending upon the camera that you're using. But if it doesn't, you can push the button to go to high speed sync. Okay, so let's try high speed sync, and we're still at TTL. And so everything hopefully will manifest itself correctly. Okay, I got him again. All right, so you can see we've even gone darker with that blue, but maybe you don't want it to go like that. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So we can also control. Now I can reduce the light that's on his face. I'm going to bring that down slightly. So I'm going to use our air remote and bring it go minus. It changes by itself. I'm doing it from here. So I'm going to bring it down a half a stop, 0.5, and we'll try it again. So this should reduce the intensity of the light. Oops, back focused. And I think I got your eyes open that time. Okay. So we got his eyes into the camera, and let's just check. It doesn't look like that compensated enough. So I'm going to try and go down even more. Half stop didn't do what I wanted it to do. So we'll go down a full stop. We'll stop and a half. And we'll try it one more time. So we have this set at a stop and a half difference. And so you can see it keeps compensating through the TTL. So I'm going to switch this over to manual from TTL and see if that does anything to give me a slightly different look to it. So, of course, that's not doing it. Let's go minus, we're on, this is 1B, right?
Yeah.
You had 1B. So I see. Okay, so what happens is because I'm on high speed sync, I'm not able to reduce the power enough on the head because you might remember the Pro Photos go from 1 to 10. And when we were doing our demo last time, you might remember that when there was a case where we couldn't get the power to go below 8. And that's what happens on high speed sync. So I'm actually not able to reduce the intensity of the light that is on his face. So I'm going to have Curtis. Yeah, put the screen in there. And go ahead and put the scrim. See if you can just hold it there. Yeah, that's good. So actually, we'll go back to TTL. Okay, so now you can see with the scrim, and pull the scrim up, Curtis, to the camera. So the scrim is a green, has the green coating on it, which gives us, takes away a quarter of a stop, or is that a half? It's a half. I think that's a half stop. That's a half stop. So again, your film people might remember scrims are different than flags. Scrims are going to reduce the intensity of the light, and they come in half stops, and you can not change the quality of the light. So we're not changing the quality of the light by putting a scrim in front of it. We're only changing the intensity of the light. So that's a way that we can control the intensity with a scrim. So now looking at this image, we can see on the lower right-hand side, we're getting some spillover from our head. And I want to see if I can eliminate that, even though I could probably just crop that. But we'll just try and use a flag to create some effect also. So this in. Yeah, I'm gonna turn the model light on. Okay, so I don't know if you could see what I was doing, but I was taking the flag and dropping it down into the light slightly so that we're going to block off a little bit more light and see if that can help on our right-hand side. Okay, so that's our new look. Oh, do we have the scrim in our? Okay, let's do it with the scrim in, but you can see over here the difference, right? On the lower right-hand side, by using that flag, what happens? I'm able to control that, and the light gets, a little bit more dramatic on his, highlighting his face and dropping off on his body. Okay, so again, we can see the difference between no scrim and scrim. And, it could be that we want to split the difference with that. And that would be all in positioning of where we have the scrim. And we, hey, there's our next model.
My 15 minutes of fame.
Okay, so any questions so far of what we're doing? I'm hoping you see the advantage of using a combination of flash and ambient. So the ambient could be anything. That could be the outside. We could be outside, and I could control the harsh daylight with my shutter speed at high speed sync while I light my model with the Pro Photos. Okay, any questions so far? All right. Okay, so now we're going to add a backlight, a second light, which you probably saw in the frame back there as a little red thing. And that's because I have the light on a sandbag. And let me see if I can go ahead and turn that on. I should be able to turn that on from the camera, from my Air remote control. But maybe I turned it off. Oh, wait a minute. I got the, hold on. Let me try it again.
This one.
Yeah, I was on the wrong setting. Yeah, I think you have to turn it on. Watch your eyes. Okay, it's fired. Okay, so again, still have it set on TTL, It's on high-speed sync. I'm at a 400th of a second at 3.5 at 125 ISO. So let's see what happens with our light back there. Okay, so there's our setup with our backlight on, with a red gel over the light, gives it sort of that effect. And going right through his neck. So what I want to look at is we'll go one stop more. So instead of a 400th of a second, let's see what it looks like at 800th of a second. So it gets much more dramatic on the background. And we would probably want to go back to our power setting to bring this up, our foreground light. Let's see if this makes a difference when I go here. No, that's going to scrim out. We still have the flag, right? Yeah. Oops, so I got the light in. Okay, so now you can see the difference because I brought the setting on the air remote to where I took off the minus power settings that I had on the key light and brought the intensity of that light slightly up, and we get a pretty dramatic look to it. Okay, and we'll go one more thing with looking at adding a small prop for our CEO, who happens to be the CEO of a large egg producer. So this is sort of our Arnold Newman. Let's have a prop for our egg producer. There we go. So this would be for the next annual report from Eggs R Us.
Uncrackable.
Uncrackable. Okay. All right. Any questions? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
How are you making that one go like horizontally versus like going vertical or some other direction?
It's because of where the light is sitting on the ground. And so it's just slightly up, or the head's slightly up, and then it's got the reflector pushed all the way out so that it's not wide, it's narrow, and then it's hitting the walls. So it's not going all over the place. If we took that reflector off, you want to try it with just the gel on it without the reflector and see what it looks like? Sure. So Curtis, you want to do that? You know how to take that reflector off?
Not 100% sure. No, like,
You pull it out.
yeah, I haven't got enough to do that.
I think my focus moved.
Nice.
Yeah, so
I was-
it's,
I was wondering if the square shape of the filter, like the gel was having to do that. Might just be the
No,
angle, yeah, the
no.
angle on the.
no, there's not that much difference actually in the configuration between,
There's a little more, it looks like light at the top, but.
let me do one more because I've got the camera angle wasn't quite. So this camera angle, you can see I'm missing, his hand has to go a little bit closer to his face. So we match that. And I have to bring the camera down a little bit lower so that we get more definition, separation between his shoulder and his hand. One way or the other. So you can see in this frame, the egg goes right in the middle of the shoulder line. And then in this frame, it's right tangent on the top of his shoulder. So we want it to be more like this than that. So bring your hand a little bit closer in here. And then your hand up slightly. Okay, right there. Okay, so you can see the difference that we have to pay attention to when we're doing something like this. In the egg itself, we have to adjust where his hand was, bring his hand closer so it's in the light. Here it's out of the light, here it's in the light. All right, so that's our CEO of Eggs R Us. Okay, so any questions out there? All right, hopefully that's a good explanation of how the Air Remote, along with the Pro Photos using TTL, can help you create some different looks. And what your assignment's going to be is going to relate to an environmental portrait. So your environmental portrait, and I'll post the assignment, but the environmental portrait does not necessarily have to be using Pro Photo, electronic flash. You can do it sort of in the vein of what we looked at with Arnold Newman, and create an environmental portrait that's utilizing a lot of those attributes that we discussed and looked at. And because we're recording this, I will post the class recording so that you can review it if you care to. And I'll also post the links to Karsh and Newman so you can review those. Okay, so what we're going to do here now is I'm going to have Curtis and Johnny do a version of their own, not in this setting because now they've been polluted with my creativity. We're going to find them something else to do here at the campus. So you guys can all sign off, and we will see you next time in class, and look for the posting of the assignment. So hopefully this was helpful to you on both the technical level and the aesthetic level.
It was
All right.
definitely very helpful. But I do have a couple of questions.
Yes.
So in the far back, you have another Pro Photo with a red gel, I believe.
Yes.
And you mentioned, I believe, what's called a scream or scream. I'm not quite sure the pronunciation of it.
Scrim.
Scrim.
S-C-R-M, Scrim.
Okay. And I believe you mentioned that had like a green coating or something.
There's a green, let me show you. So the green frame around it signifies what what amount of light it reduces intensity wise. So
Okay.
there's one that's red that will have a tighter netting and will block off more light. So it would be letting less light through. So depending upon your needs. So also one thing to keep in mind is we normally use one edge, you'll see doesn't have a frame on it. So if we wanted to bring this to where we had it in front of the light, where it was just half scrim, the lighting, we would use that rough edge rather than this hard edge, which would give us a harder delineation. This is going to give us a softer delineation than if we had it interrupting with this.
Okay, and that doesn't come out in the picture at all, right? Like the edge?
No, because we had this particular one covered completely, the light covering the whole thing. So we reduced all of the light by doing that rather than having it to split it.
So this would be the equivalent of dodging.
Yes, well,
Okay.
yes, I guess you could say that. When just, you have to keep in mind, it's not changing the quality of the light. So
Right,
our light quality is still has that harder contrasty edge to it, as opposed to like putting diffusion over the light. You know, if this was like a diffused piece of diffusion, then the light would be softer because we're changing the
Okay.
quality of the light. This does not change the quality of the light.
okay, that's pretty much the question that I had, thank you.
Yeah.
Guys, have fun doing your project. I honestly wish I was there.
Well, not for the traffic.
Well, I have a torn meniscus on my right leg, so I
You
was,
you wouldn't want to be here today.
yeah, I didn't want to deal with having to.
Ask those guys where they parked.
So seriously, how far away did you guys park?
Almost a mile.
Yep.
Oh,
Sounds about
wow.
right.
Yikes.
I
Well,
I stumbled into a parking structure that was $10 all day. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
not bad. I was just like,
well, that's awesome. Well, guys, thank you.
All right.
Professor Robbins, thank you very much. You guys have a good rest of the weekend.
All right. You too.
Thanks, Professor.
Have a good weekend. If you have any questions about anything you saw today, just, send me an email and we'll get you an answer.
Thank you, sir.
All right.